Good afternoon, and welcome to the Voice of Wisdom. With over 60 years of experience as an investment banker, entrepreneur, investment analyst, economist, and venture capitalist, Morty Davis is Wall Street and capitalism personified. The over 400 companies for which he has raised more than $3 billion over the years have created a countless number of jobs and exciting new products. Through the Voice of Wisdom, Mr. Davis explores, analyzes, and debates the most topical political, economic, and social issues facing our world today. Joining Mr. Davis today for a discussion on the banking system and the recent banking crisis is returning guest Ephraim Lowy. And now, Mr. Davis and Mr. Lowy.
Hello again. It's great to be back with you, my cherished listeners, and it's also great to have the brilliant Ephraim Lowy. We've had him on before, and by popular demand, he's back. And today we're going to discuss. We changed our subject at the very last minute because it's become so topical and so on so many people's mind, and I found that people are asking me all about it. So we switched from we'll do the earlier announcement next week about the budget that we were going to discuss, and we're going to discuss the banking crisis that suddenly arose. I don't know if you're aware of it, but the Swiss bank as well today crashed. It's down sharply, maybe 20 or 30% or more. And the Signature Bank, if you haven't heard about it, has been likewise taken over by the government, in addition to the Silicon Valley Bank. So let's talk about this. Let's discuss it. If you have any questions, please get in touch with me, with us, and we'll go right to it. My feeling is, and it backs the senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, who is the most knowledgeable of any senator or congressman, and even the president, as to the workings of the banking system. And she's been a strong supporter of Dodd-Frank, which was set up after the 2008 banking disaster, the crash of the banks, and the inception of the Great Recession that started in 2008, because the banks lost control, made loans on homes, on houses purchased that were worth very much less than they were making these loans at, and everybody was enthused because those loans paid higher than the government bonds, and traditionally those were the safest as AAA investments, because when I bought my home back in 1963, it was the safest because I had to put down 20% deposit, and I had to show that I had a job, a decent paying job, and I had no other debt, or certainly not any meaningful amount of debt. So that was a trip. Houses never dropped 20%, and if they dropped, by the time they dropped, you had paid off some of the debt, so they were down to less than 80%. But it was the safest. But everybody got so excited about, you can't lose on a house if you buy it. It only goes up. So the banks lent you on on your future expectations. They even lent you the original deposit. They were so eager to create that paper because everybody wanted to buy that paper instead of government bonds, because they had AAA ratings. The rating agencies were corrupted because they put AAA on them, even though they knew that they should be way less than AAA. But since some of the agencies were going to do it, they were in competition with the other agencies. Otherwise, they wouldn't get the business because it was paid for by the banks, and the banks wanted the high rating so they could sell that paper. That what do they call it? The
Junk bonds?
well, they weren't junk bonds. They were supposedly AAA bonds, but they're called
Mortgage-backed securities?
yes,
Mortgage-backed securities.
yeah, securities. They created all kind of, in that period, and still to this day, they create all kind of securities that are backed by different assets. So they're only as good as the assets that back them if they go bad. And the houses went bad. One fellow, who was I think he was a former senior partner of Goldman Sachs, collateralized CMOs, yeah, collateralized mortgage obligations. But they've developed this thing on Wall Street, always figure out how to make more money, of packing anything up that people will buy and putting an interest rate on them and selling them. So that's their business. And the instance, Goldman Sachs wound up paying, I think it was $512 million to the federal authorities because they were aware of this guy Paulson, who made over $1 billion shorting this one securitized mortgage loan, a group of houses, and they knew that he was shorting it, and they were selling it to their clients without telling them that he put together the package and then shorted it. So it sounded, the SEC at that time announced that was the biggest fine they'd ever imposed on any Wall Street firm or any firm at all. And a few days later, the Wall Street Journal said, "Oh yeah, it's a very big fine, but it's 12 days of income from for Goldman Sachs." So for them, it's like a parking ticket. All the people that did all the wrongs at all the banks, their bonuses might have been reduced subsequently, but not one of them, to my knowledge, went to jail. And it cost the government and lots of middle class people, and even the lowest class, in terms of lowest class in the economic hierarchy, their savings, almost all of their savings, because they put it all into their homes, and then the homes were taken away from them. They were foreclosed. So that's my opening statement. I want to hear what your view is.
Do you think maybe we should just talk a little bit about how it went down, Silicon Valley Bank?
Sure.
Do you mind? Maybe some of our listeners aren't perfectly familiar with what happened. So we had a good old...
That's a good insight.
Yeah, so we had a good old classic bank run, right? Those who were around during the Great Depression saw this more than 1,000 times on individual banks. But what was unique about this one, right, it was Silicon Valley Bank was in compliance with all these stress tests from the regulators, right? So it had net assets over 200 billion, net liabilities, probably I think around 175 with a spread of 25 billion.
What did you say was 200 million?
Their assets were about 200
2 billion,
200 billion, sorry.
not 200 billion, 2 billion. I think 2 billion. Oh, was it 200 billion?
I believe it's 200
Oh,
billion.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
200 billion.
sorry. So I
It
think
was the
that,
16th largest bank,
right.
even though they called themselves a small bank and didn't have to be monitored, because if they went bankrupt, it wouldn't jeopardize the total economy as much as if one of the big banks went.
Right, they wouldn't have been too big to fail. Well, why don't we get to that in a second? So they had net assets that were above
200.
net liabilities, right?
Pretty big.
But it
200 billion is pretty big.
is a lot, but if you have 180 or 175 billion of net liabilities, your spread is 20 billion. Now, theoretically, the way a bank runs is you assume not everybody's gonna withdraw their money on the same day, except when they do, right? So why did right? So go to if everybody in J.P. Morgan, the best capitalized bank in the country, decided to pull their money on the same day, J.P. Morgan would have a problem. But people don't. Now, why would people want to pull their money on the same day? Is when the bank is potentially insolvent. So let's figure out how that happened. What really happened is they got a little greedy, and there's a little loophole in the regulation that kind of covered up this greed. There's a loophole in the regulation, whereas if you have a treasury bill that you plan on holding to maturity, you can report it at its maturity value. So let's say you have 100
On its face, as
face value, right? So let's say you bought treasury bills at 2%, right? So treasury bills, just for the audience, they're bought at a discount. So the way you buy a treasury bill at the discount, and if you buy 100 billion, you'll get 100 billion if it's a 10-year in 10 years. So let's say you bought 100 billion of 10-year treasury bills at a discount when interest rates were 2%.
no, even if you paid the full price. If you at the time you bought it, the going rate was 2%.
Correct. I'm just
Then
saying.
it would be at whatever $1 billion at 2%. It would still be at $1 billion. By
Agreed.
face value.
You pay-
It's only as the interest rate changes and you could buy at a higher rate, that what you have is worth less.
Right. So again, what I simply meant there is when you buy a T-bill, you don't. Let's say you buy a $1 million T-bill.
They
You
didn't
don't
buy.
pay.
They didn't buy T-bills.
I'm just getting
Yeah.
the idea out.
Explain T-bill.
Right. So if you buy a T-bill, you don't.
Explain what a T-bill is.
So if you buy a treasury bill, basically, if you
It's-
buy
it's
debt from the U.S.
very,
government,
very short term.
right? But there are 10-year treasuries. There are overnight. There are all different durations of treasury of assets backed by the U.S. government, where the U.S. government is paying you. You pay the interest rate discount, and you receive the money at the end.
If you buy a very short term one,
Yeah,
you have almost no fluctuation
correct.
because you're not impacted in a month. It matures. You get your money back that you put in, and you replace it with another. So
Correct.
you're not impacted by the change. But when you buy as they did,
Right. So if you buy a 10-year and the interest rates go up, so bonds or treasury notes are inversely correlated to interest rates. So as interest rates rise, the price of your bond goes down. So if you hold it for 10 years, you'll still get $100 million. But if you have to sell it today, it's worth significantly less, because if anyone else wanted to borrow, you're getting 2% and they're getting 5%. It's worth significantly less. So on that balance sheet that had $200 billion of assets were tons of 10-year treasury notes that were not in fact worth $200 billion or whatever their net worth was if they had to sell today. If they held it for 10 years, that would be fine. So what was
so
happening?
the balance sheet, as reported, was distorted because
Correct.
they were using the price they paid rather than the price that it dropped to.
Correct, which was legal, just to be clear. It was a legal distortion. So if you plan, if it's an
I
asset,
don't know why it's legal.
that's an excellent point. It should absolutely not be legal. If
Should
there's
be
one
mark
regulation,
to market.
every liquid asset should be marked to market, regardless if it's going to be held to maturity. If there's one thing that goes on, one piece of regulation that's needed that is 100% true,
Right.
it's insane that anything that can be marked to market is not. But
But
just
the
one
banks-
more piece.
But I have to point out, the banks are favored in that respect because they lobbied for that kind of treatment.
Yeah.
No, there's no reason other people have to mark their
Look, it's a
assets.
transparency thing, right? Like confidence. When do you not have confidence in a bank or any institution is when they're non-transparent, right? So I just want to finish up the thread. Now, what was the other thing happening? SVB, right, Silicon Valley Bank, much of the money on deposit came from the venture and the technology sector, and no deals were getting funded over the last 6 months as interest rates rose. So they're not getting new deposits, right? And their old deposits, they bought 10-year T-bills. Sorry, I forgot one point. Why did they buy 10-year T-bills? Because the
bills.
banks...
10 years are not bills. 10 years are bonds.
Sorry, 10-year bonds. The reason they do it is because banks wanted to make the spread, right? You give your depositor X percent, you lend it out at X plus 1%, and you make some money. So if they had $100 million on deposit, they'd pay, I don't know, sub 1% to their depositors, and then they'll buy T-bills at 2%, and they're making that spread. But the problem always is every investor knows when it comes to debt, is something called duration, right? You can't have mismatched duration. So as Mr. Davis said, if your duration is 30 days, nothing bad is going to happen to you because the market can't change that much in 30 days. And if it does, you just wait it out. But if your duration is 10 years, right, that your asset is a 10-year duration, but your liability from a bank, the deposit is a liability because you have to give that money back to the investor when they call it, is at some time earlier, then you're kind of screwed. So had Silicon Valley been able to wait 10 years, right, if no one called any deposits within 10 years, they would be fine. But what happened in essence is people got wind. They understood there was a problem in the balance sheet. And if there's a problem in a balance sheet in a bank, you need your money. And when everyone calls their money, a bank is immediately insolvent for good reason. Now, let's just quickly say what the Fed did and didn't do here. The Fed did not bail out any of the equity holders in Silicon Valley Bank. They just guaranteed the deposits, right? So unlike what happened in 2008 with TARP, where the government perhaps bailed out some big companies, the Fed bailed out some big companies. They were very clear, right? If whoever owned Silicon Valley Bank or any shareholders, their stock is now worth zero. And I'm pretty sure the same with Signature Bank, right?
Right.
So, but what the government did do is instead of federally insuring the $250,000 limit on deposit, they just basically turned that number from $250,000 to infinity. So whoever were depositors, and again, a rational case could be made that depositors didn't do anything wrong here. They invested in a bank that the regulator said met the stress tests, right? So they were guaranteed. And ostensibly, the systematic risk there was basically you'd have no companies in Silicon Valley functioning. They wouldn't be making payroll, and that could wipe out our technology industry, which is our most important industry and everyone's most important industry for 5 or 10 years. So that's what happened.
But excuse me, as Elizabeth Warren, who's, as I mentioned earlier, the most knowledgeable about the banking system of anybody in Congress or the president and his people, she points out it should have never happened. It wouldn't have happened if the banks, and one of the leaders of that effort was the head of the SVB of the Silicon Valley Bank, and the small, what they call small banks, unquote. It's not such a small bank if it's 16th in the United States when there's thousands of banks, and with $200 billion, it's hardly a tiny bank. But they said it's too costly for us to comply with the stress tests every time, because if they kept that, they had. Let me go back. After 2008 and the trouble that emanated from the bank's behavior of, if it works out, they make the profit. If it doesn't work out, it's socialized.
Exactly.
The taxpayers pay for it. So they said that's wrong, and we've got to protect the vulnerability of the banks so they don't have these big losses again and go under. and we'd have to save them. And some people even argue that if the government had saved Lehman, maybe we wouldn't have had the same kind of crash. But that's neither here nor there. Lehman was not saved, but all the other banks were saved. Goldman Sachs, for example, had billions of dollars insured by AIG. AIG was like the most aggressive risk-taking. They do a formula and they'd insure anything. So they insured some of Goldman Sachs's vulnerability with, and AIG went under. They couldn't pay off all the insurance. So they were negotiating, and I thought, Goldman Sachs would be lucky if they got 50 cents on the dollar, and probably would have been happy getting, because they were in bankruptcy, AIG, and couldn't pay people. But through the negotiations, one of the major negotiator in the deal was a former managing partner of Goldman Sachs. They got 100 cents on the dollar, which was unbelievable, unheard of. And for all their sins, not one bank president or none of the executives of any banks that perpetrated this crash that hurt not only the Americans but all the foreign banks bought these instruments. It was a worldwide bust out. I mean, it killed every financial institution because they all bought these mortgage-backed instruments that went to nothing in some cases, or dropped 80 or 90%. So it's interesting that nobody got punished the way they should have been or would have been normally. I don't know what the rationale for that was. These are very brilliant guys that were leading these banks, but they knew, heads they win.
Yeah.
Tails the public, the taxpayer will pay it off. It was a no-lose deal for them.
It was definitely misaligned incentives, right? There was asymmetric risk where, like you said, they took risks where they would benefit on the upside, and on the downside, the taxpayer would have to pay for it because they're too big to fail. So Dodd-Frank was actually a very solid piece of legislation
to avoid it ever happening.
And it did kind of work here.
It didn't work. It worked. If repeal it, they repealed it in 1918 and 2018. I'm talking about when I was operating, 1918. Right. But in 2018, Trump repealed it. Congress repealed it because Becker, who's head of SVP, was one of the leaders. Yeah. But all of the small banks came and lobbied and sent their lawyers, and they came themselves and said, look, it's a burden on us. It affects our profitability, preparing for these tests. And, we don't endanger the economy, so would you take us off that requirement to meet tests?
Right.
And if they had left it, this couldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened, because they would have found that their bonds were insufficient to pay. That's what they test for. What happens if we have a real?
Well, so there are two things here. One is, I think what we're both agreeing on here is that.
Wait a second. There must be some mistake. We're both agreeing.
Is that right? For markets to function properly and to evolve, right? All evolution is survival of the fittest. So bad companies should fail, right? And bad banks should fail. Why would the government ever step in?
And bad decisions.
And bad decisions should carry weight to them, right? If there's no skin in the game, then you don't learn how to make good decisions.
Particularly since these guys created their own danger. If they were tested, it wouldn't have happened, and it would, in other words, it saves them if they get tested, because they come in and say, you gotta raise more capital, or you gotta sell the bonds or something,
Right.
and they didn't do that.
And
And it shouldn't have happened, and her bank failures were entirely avoidable.
well, so
And
how?
if they kept that law and that ruling in place under Dodd-Frank initially, they would test.
Well, but
tested
I'm
like
not
the big
sure,
banks.
right? So
I'm positive.
Well, but I'm saying if SVB had this mismatched duration, right?
But it would have been discovered before this, they would have come in and that's what they test for. What happens if a crash comes and you got to deal with it right away? That's the whole test of Dodd-Frank. So they would have said you got to raise more capital, or you got to sell the bonds and stop being vulnerable to the decline of your bonds. So it definitely would have been avoidable. Absolutely.
Okay,
There's
I'll take your word for it. I'm a little
Paul Krugman said the same thing.
yeah, you know,
He's a Nobel Prize winner, economic winner. So
I'm mildly disinclined to give props to Elizabeth Warren was when she was front running and tweeting, kind of contributing in some way to this bank run. She was tweeting about it well before it happened, and you know her.
what was she doing? I'm not familiar with that.
She basically tweeted. You know, she was communicating effectively to people to get their money out of SVB. Right, so Elizabeth Warren has a long-standing
I have
hatred.
no idea, but that.
Well, her policy, you know, of just tax the wealthier you are. Again, I'm all for taxing the wealthy. It's just the rhetoric,
I'm wealthy,
right?
and I'm for me. And Warren Buffett said it's outrageous that he's in a higher tax bracket
Yes.
than his secretary.
1,000,000%.
In a lower tax. I'm sorry. He pays a lower tax than his secretary.
Agreed, but let me say it this way. There's politics and there's policy, sound policy. So politics is a lot about grandstanding and playing to your base and generating hate and anger against, you know, big banks. And go ahead, by all means. If that's how you get your votes, go get your votes that way. But let's just talk about what the Fed did do here. They did not in any way bail out the bank, right? They're shareholders of the bank. What the government did do is just insure the depositors, right? So let's just take a step back. All these stress tests, right, are pretty good, except when the correlation of everything goes to one, right? Like if there's a bank run on all banks, right, no bank in the world, not even JPM.
You're right, but it precludes that ever happening.
Oh.
The tests are there to preclude that.
The tests are there to ensure confidence in the system.
No, to prevent they
Again,
force you to raise capital anytime.
Well, let's just say practically, if any bank, a very healthy bank, that's assets exceed liabilities, and every single depositor, again, this is not an actual, it's a hypothetical. If every single depositor withdrew their funds today, no bank would be solvent. Not a single bank, no matter what stress test
That's not
follow.
true. The Fed, they go to the Fed window, and if they have the assets, the Fed would give them the
But
liquidity.
technically, the Fed's only insuring the account up to 250, right? So when the correlation
No, I'm
goes to one,
saying, but if it jeopardizes the economy, but it can happen because they're making them, protect against that possibility. They make you in advance raise the capital or do enough to that's what it's supposed to prevent. It's supposed to prevent, I forget the terminology, but it's like some.
So let me ask you this.
What they call it? It's two words. It's like a.
Hamantaschen.
It's Hamantash.
That's one word.
No, if we have a crash, look at the worst thing
crisis
that
of
could happen.
confidence?
No, the worst thing, everything goes wrong. We want the big banks to be immune.
Systematic risk.
By,
Too big to fail?
I'm saying, no, there's a thing. It's nothing to do with bank. It's like the
Well,
the
so let me ask you
terminology
this.
that
What do you think the regulation should look like?
it should be exactly what it was. It was there to protect the public, to protect the banks. They fight. The trouble with most people is they fight for things that are really detrimental to their best interests. Like I'm writing a book now. I point out that the rich should be the ones most concerned by inequality. Why? Because the little guy, if he's got no money now, after the crash, after the revolution, he'll have no money. What was the problem? How did the French Revolution arrive? There was so much inequality.
That's right.
When they went to what's her name,
Yeah, Marie Antoinette.
Marie Antoinette. Yeah, Marie Antoinette, and they said the people
Let them eat cake.
don't have money for bread. They can't even buy bread. She said, so let them eat cake. That shows you how counterproductive. It was stupid, because if they gave the people a little more wherewithal to buy bread,
Yeah.
they wouldn't.
Look.
So in this country also, any country where all the wealth got to the top, they always had a revolution.
They're coming with the pitchforks.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more here. We're agreeing twice today.
Yeah, twice.
Right?
No, but I'm saying the rich should be the most interested in stability, and yet they don't.
Can I say it a
They
slightly
should have
different way?
they should have been against the $2 trillion tax cut that was totally unnecessary
So-
that Trump gave.
I totally agree with this. And again,
There's
let's
something
put it
wrong
this
with
way.
this program because you're agreeing with me too much.
Well, no, we can agree. It's fine too. Look, if all self-help could be boiled down to choose long-term over short-term, right? Every self-help book on the planet is basically telling you how to choose long-term over short-term. And if you want to know every stupid decision anybody's ever made, it's choosing short-term over long-term, right? So someone wealthy wants a 3% cut on his taxes. But really, what that 3% is going to anger the people so much that you're going to get Bernie Sanders is going to tax you 70%, right?
Yeah.
So, like, you're worth $1 billion, pay your 3%, right? And forget about it, right? So, like, the corporate tax cut. You know who was doing just perfectly fine in America? Was Apple, Amazon. These guys were doing fine, right? You know who's struggling is the middle class and the lower income families. Now, even if you're the most selfish
as
person,
well as they were doing, they were devious and greedy because they moved all their profits outside the United States, and then twice they did this.
so
But they said if you let us bring back those funds at a lower rate,
Right.
which they should have paid
Anyway.
before they moved them. I don't know if you realize, Apple moved all their intellectual
to Ireland.
to Ireland.
Yes.
And afterwards, it showed that their average employee in this country produced about maybe $400,000 or $500,000, and the average employee in Ireland produced $25 million because there was
Right. No, and these companies are incredibly concerned with what's it called, diversity, inclusion, and equality.
Yeah.
Super concerned about that, but not actually giving any money to help the lower income families because they're not paying taxes, right? So it's literally insane. Like, you can save 1%, 2%, but you're creating a tail risk.
They saved a lot more than 1 or 2. You know what
But you're
happened?
creating a risk to the entire system.
You know what
right?
happened? How they sent money back? They told the government, if you let us bring back the money, we will create jobs and we will invest in growth and facilities and manufacturing and buildings. Well, they cut it to 10%, which was much less than a going rate that they should have paid. Mm-hmm. And they brought back the money, and they were full of bunk because what they use the money for, because companies will never invest in manufacturing equipment or additional facilities or anything like that, or hire new employees, if they're operating at 65 or 70% of capacity, right, which they won't. So why build more capacity? So they did just the opposite. They raised dividends and they bought their shares in. And then 3 years ago, during Trump's tenure. They did it again. They said, "Let us bring it back, and we'll create jobs." And they did the exact same thing.
Yeah,
So they're devious and greedy.
Yeah.
And as I said a number of times, and I'll say it again, our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, collectively says we should work to perfect this nation, and secondly, or equally, we are directed to produce life, liberty, or encourage or enhance life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it was sadly what happened. It's evolved. It's life, liberty, and not even life, but life, liberty, and the pursuit of ever larger GDP and ever bigger growth. Milton Friedman said the only obligation of a corporation is to maximize the profits. And that is so nonsensical because Eli Lilly has been selling, what's the drug they sell? What? Insulin for $100 to $750 when it cost them $2 to make. And also, there were no patents on it. They didn't invent it. It's 100 years old. They bought it for $3 because the two guys that invented it wanted it to be available to the masses throughout the country, throughout the world, and they said they didn't have the capacity to do that, so they turned it over to Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly has been gouging and greed, because I just read recently a woman, it was a choice between eating or getting her son insulin, and she was trying to stretch it out, not by another vial, till the end of the month. And meanwhile, he died because he didn't have the insulin. So that greed, now they just cut it down to $35.
It's short-term thinking, right?
Like $35, we're still way above what it cost them, what it should be. It's outrageous.
Yeah,
and you know, and they say the government should stay out, private business, private, free enterprise, private. That's bullshit. We need more regulations, not less. Let me where we need more regulations.
Here's where
and it shows that life doesn't matter. Every parent, when they send their kids to school now, is worried about the kid may get killed in school. Mm-hmm. That never was a problem when I was a kid. But the NRA is so greedy, the National Rifle Association is so greedy, they spend tens of millions of dollars. In my new book that I'm writing now, it's an economics book, political book, and so forth. Mm-hmm. So I talk about checks and balances. Checks and balances is part of what the founders talked about. They didn't verbalize it in any of the Constitution, but they arranged it so there would be checks and balances. And it's developed that way. We have checks that go to all the congressmen and to the donors, big checks, and that's what determines it. It's not a democracy; it's a plutocracy, because the rich decide what.
Yeah,
but we need more regulation on what do you call it, on global warming. But that's bad, because that's going to affect profits, and global warming won't affect us for another 100 years. So don't bother with that. That's and they find scientists that just like the cigarette industry used to find scientists that said there's no harm to.
Well, so here's where I'll push back a little bit. While I agree with most of it, you don't need more regulation. You need better regulation, right? So
you need more regulation.
Well, I disagree.
That's like saying
the regulators need to be smarter, right? So look at the tax code.
They say there's laws out there for guns, so there's no other country that has this experience, and we keep having it. You know how many mass means for mass slaughters.
Yeah.
So how many we had this year? over 100. There's not 100 days yet. That means there's more than one every single day, and we don't do anything about it
Again, there's
because it affects the profitability of the big contributors,
whatever
the
could
retailers
possibly-
of guns, the manufacturers of guns, the wholesalers of guns. It's outrageous. Life doesn't matter. It's not even life. But it's greed. It's heartlessness. I don't understand how we live that way. You know, we're supposed to be civilized. We're supposed to even war. The United States is the most belligerent country in the world. We got the biggest part of the budget is our defense budget. Defense, nothing. It's an offense budget. At least half of it's offense. So they say, well, the best defense is a good offense. But that's nonsense, because what we should defend against is a thing that's going to kill us all. And it's not wars, and it's not terrorists. It's cancer, it's heart disease, it's pandemics. This last pandemic, we lost so far 1 million people, COVID. We haven't lost that in all the wars since the Second World War, and maybe even including the Second World War, the United States. We hadn't been attacked on our own land, our own territory, in our whole history. Never. And we're involved in more wars than anybody else. So they say, well, you know, a big defense budget shows everybody that we're so powerful that so they won't start up with us. But we start up with everybody. And we haven't won a war since the Second World War. We didn't win the Korean War. We still haven't got peace with North Korea. We don't have a peace agreement. We didn't win the Vietnam War. We left with our tails between our legs or something. We didn't win the Iraq War. Nobody wins the war. I mean, you know, it's horrendous. We send young people who would be best friends with the people they're supposed to kill on the other side, if not for the governments saying they're the enemy, and we prepare bigger guns and guns that shoot 100 bullets a minute. I don't understand how we've become so heartless, so ruthless. It's outrageous.
Bringing the conversation back to Silicon Valley Bank, are there any other bad actors other than the regulators, do you think? Are there any other factors or anyone else at fault here?
Of course. The managers of the banks are at fault, but they can only be at fault if we don't have enough control over what they do, if we don't have fences around it so it can't happen. You know, what do you call it? The gun lobby always says, well, it's not guns that kill, it's people that, it's not people that kill, it's not guns that kill, it's people that kill. So the guns are not to blame. But no other country has anything like it. None. Not even close. Even the most backward countries don't have what we have. And certainly not Britain or Australia or New Zealand. They have one event and they changed the law dramatically. In Australia they had one mass killing. In 1995 they took away everybody's guns. Now it takes a year to get a gun. You got to go through police. You got to take a test like before you get a driver's license. You got to show that you know how to handle a gun, that you know how to keep it safe. Just like before they let you drive a car. You know, we don't have any laws like that. And they want to do background checks on the people that get the guns to make sure criminals don't get it or people with a bad. So they only give the retailer 3 days. And if he doesn't get an answer from the government in 3 days, he can sell the gun to the guy. But worse than that, you can buy a gun at a gun show without any background check. And you could buy 40, 50 guns and leave with 40 or 50 guns and then sell them to anybody else. And the people you sell them to and never background check. So it's so, These are such obvious things we could do to save lives, children's lives, and we don't do it. And and the other thing that it says, I don't know if it says in the Torah, but certainly I know that it says in the New Testament, I think, that to those who receive the most, they're obligated to give the most. I'm paraphrasing it. It's not exactly
statement
that way.
in the. Our source is a statement in the Talmud.
What does it say?
In the 6th parak of Ksubis, it discusses a story about one of the 3 wealthy people of Jerusalem, who was fabulously wealthy, and then after the exile, or after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saw his daughter picking food from among animal excrement, and he said, "What happened to all your father's wealth and your father-in-law's wealth?" She had married wealthy, and she said, "Well, he didn't give enough charity." And he said, "What do you mean? I saw how much tremendous charity he gave." So the Talmud uses the terminology, "Lefum gam shichna," according to the camel as its load, right? The bigger the camel, the higher the burden it has to carry. So even though he gave fabulous amounts of charity, the more he had, right, the more he was responsible, right? Similar, man's responsible for the universe because he runs it, right? So always we look at might and power. The king, right? The king is responsible to his nation. He's not there simply to tax and live off the nation, right? Power is always a great responsibility in the hands of the wise and the brave and men of great character.
Talking about regulations, another event that happened just a few weeks ago was the railroad car that, what was the name of the railroad company?
Norfolk Southern.
Northwood?
Norfolk Southern.
Norfolk Southern?
Norfolk.
Norfolk Southern. So the train went off the tracks in East Palestine, or I forget, it's East Palestine or something, in Ohio. And it jeopardized the whole community. Their water is in danger, their chemical is in danger. All because these companies lobbied to prevent or to stop regulations that would require them to have different kind of brakes, and especially with dangerous chemicals when you carry different kind of protections. And they lobbied against it successfully. So those are the checks and balances, the checks that go, and until something like this happens. And usually, even after kids are shot in schools over and over again, you'd think that Congress would enact something and they'd care about it. Maybe till some congressmen's kids get, it's a shame.
There's, going back to kind of, there's a principal agent problem, sort of.
Principal agent problem?
Right, so the point, there's the decision makers and who's affected by the decision, right? Like, so Congress is making the decision, but it's some other kid, like you're saying, right, getting shot at school. And if a congressman's kid got shot, he would feel differently.
Yeah, but I wish it was the people's decision, or they represented what the majority of the people want. So instead of the guy, they have to win in the House of Representatives. Every 2 years they run.
Right.
So by the time they take office, they're already campaigning for the next 2 years. What's his name? Who was so embarrassing? Santos. You heard about him, right?
Yeah.
So today he announced. Today was the deadline. So he announced he's running again for office. Could you believe that? So it's outrageous, and the election doesn't occur till a year from November. So
yeah, look, it's you think about Putin, who knows he'll be in power indefinitely, versus a president of the U.S., right, who has to come up for re-election every 4 years, and
I'm
tomorrow's
not,
headlines are
I'm
important.
not sure that's going to happen.
I'm just saying.
I think, what's his name, Trump's ideal is Putin. If he gets reelected, next time he won't leave the White
The
House.
election cycle makes for bad outcomes, right? So, like I was saying before,
Well,
all good decisions are long-term over short-term. But every single person in Congress is fighting for a seat every 2 to 4 years. So, why does no one care about global warming?
No, so
Right?
that was,
Because
that was exactly the point I wanted to make. So right away they got to raise money. So if they got to raise money to get elected, who do they listen to when they get elected? The donor who they're depending on. So it's not what the people want, it's what the donors want. And if the NRA is the biggest donor, then they call the shots.
Would you eliminate all lobbying from DC? Would you make lobbying illegal?
I don't know if lobbying is the culprit. I'd make big donations, which was also outrageous. The Supreme Court decided that corporations are people, and so they could give as much as they want. They can't give it directly, but they could give it to a PAC who supports the guy. So that changed the whole. I forget what that law was. It was called the. You remember that? What it was called? The case was, yeah. These days I have very poor recognition or recollection of names, or anything else for that matter.
I think we all look forward to having your recollection at your age. So, meaning,
Well,
we always look towards...
What do you mean at my age?
Well,
You know how old I am?
72.
No, much younger.
Sorry.
I read it.
The hat looks 72 years old.
No, I read my age like you'd read Hebrew, from right to left. So I'm 49. If you read it from left to right, I'm 94. So I'm a great believer in the Hebrew.
In 7 years, it won't matter which way you read it.
Why? Because the earth won't.
You'll be
the earth
101.
won't- The earth won't be here anymore. Yeah.
So if we always look to the underlying cause, right, the deeper cause, right, what creates bad incentives here, right? Again, we spoke about, well, money's all...
Follow the money. That's it.
But you're never going to get rid of the money, right? And capitalism,
No,
for
but
every excess capitalism has...
But you could let money play a much smaller part than the votes of the people. A democracy is supposed to represent the people, not the congressman that gets elected because he spent.
But there's no way around money playing a role, right? So look,
No, but
can,
limit it.
You can speak
Limit
about
it.
the excesses
Limit
of
it.
capitalism, but every advancement that the world has made over the last 100 years has come from democratic capitalism, right? Like every advancement in science, medicine, technology, for the most part, has been fueled by this U.S. capitalism. Yes, there's excesses, there's greed, there are negative externalities.
I don't think there's a better system than capitalism so
Right.
far.
So the money is going to throw its weight around
you
one way or
remember,
the
you
other.
remember what Churchill said, capitalism is the worst of all, but whether it was capitalism or democracy, I forget which. I think capitalism, the worst of all systems, except compared to all the rest. It's like Ford said when he only made black cars initially, and people were complaining. So he put out an advertisement. You could have any color car you want as long as it's black.
Sounds like the Jewish husband choice.
Yeah,
Right?
What's the Jewish husband?
You can have anything for dinner as long as it's what I made, right? We can go anywhere for a vacation as long as it's Miami.
Or what's his name's famous line? His wife asked him, Henny Youngman, his wife asked him to take her somewhere she's never been. So he took her to the kitchen.
Just wrapping up. To get your
When you're having fun, time flies. We only have 5 minutes left.
Yeah, when you're agreeing, time flies, right?
No, even if we disagree, we're not the kind of people like some people. At the end of their disagreement, they don't. Even my own kids are so angry they don't want to talk to me about politics. We could disagree, and we could agree to disagree, but still, I respect your opinion, and I still love you.
Same here, same here. And I would
But
say
don't
even
tell
more.
your wife.
I would say even stronger, right? If you surround yourself with only people who agree, you're probably not getting smarter at any point in your life, right? A healthy discussion, actually, there's this guy, Jonathan Haidt, who's a professor at NYU, actually a Jewish guy, who started a heterodox academy because he's proven that if even people have the same like basically everyone in academia is a liberal, right? But he says if everyone has the
Not
same
everyone.
belief,
Not everyone.
well, sorry, I was a little
You
hyperbole
could say
there.
the vast majority.
The vast majority. But the point is it produces bad science, right? When you don't have differing opinions and you have groupthink, you have some sort of echo chamber, you get bad science. So he founded something called the Heterodox Academy. And, you're only going to get smarter by an honest, open, intellectual discussion with the other point of view, right?
If you listen.
Yeah, if you listen. And by the way,
A lot of people don't listen.
And that's what I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast before. Like people think of the political landscape in terms of Democrats and Republicans. I don't think of it that way. I think of it, they're extremists and they're moderates. There are people who know how to talk to other people and can see both sides.
Yeah.
Those tend to be the intelligent people. The dumb people can only see one side. The dumber you are, the more extreme you get, right? Like, if I'm intelligent, I can probably wrap my head around your differing opinion. So, give me any moderate Democrat over a Republican over any extreme person. You're not even looking at it the right way. It's not right and left. It's nuts and intelligent people, right? Like, and just everyone's viewing it the wrong way.
Yeah, but these days, either the Democrats or the Republicans that have strong feelings always say what you're saying is not moderate; it's extremist. Even what you say that's moderate, they define as extremist.
Yeah.
If you want to do right by the poor people, oh my God, you're a communist.
Correct.
You're a socialist.
I've been, like you, I'm sure, I've been labeled as an extreme liberal for questioning whether there are things about Trump this community should question, right? Hey, vote for him all you want, but maybe there's something, right? Maybe he's not the Messiah. Maybe, right? Like, oh man, you're a liberal. Well, no, maybe I'm not a liberal. Maybe I am. I'm just questioning something, right?
He's definitely the Messiah, because I don't know anybody that could be so guilty of in so many places and still never get touched.
Yeah.
That is a miracle.
Okay.
You know, like DeSantis is running against him. They say he's got a chance. I don't believe he has a chance, because Jeb Bush came in. I don't know if you remember.
I do.
There was
They called him low energy.
16 guys. No, but I'm saying the guy hasn't been heard from since. He had the most money. He was the favorite to win that thing because it's name recognition, everything. And he wiped them out. And he'll do the same thing to, he's already done it to Haley. And he'll do the same thing to, I don't know if you heard his rant yesterday on
No,
dissent.
thankfully was spared.
And did you hear what he said about January 6th?
I did not.
It's what's his name's fault, Pence's fault. Because if Pence would have done what he had told him to do, there wouldn't have been
there'd also be no more democracy. If Pence done that. Look, the wisdom. So
no, but could you imagine blaming Pence? And Pence is the biggest idiot because he was screaming, "Hang Pence" and everything, and Pence has no backbone to attack him because he may want to run for president and he needs his magma votes.
Look, the wisdom is always in the nuance, and I think.
Wait, they're telling me to say goodbye. The producer's saying say goodbye. What do you want to say?
I was just saying, part of the challenge here, part of the Trump phenomenon, right, is we're in a social media world and a soundbite world, and whoever's louder is better, right? I think Trump is I call the Kardashian of politics, right? He's just out there, right? Like, and the subtlety, the wisdom in the world is always in nuance, is always in discussion. But discussion doesn't fit in a soundbite and doesn't fit in people's attention span nowadays. And instead of understanding another side, we just got to scream at them, right? And whoever screams louder wins, right? Like, oh, you're a liberal. Oh, we just label and we virtue signal and we use every conversational, manipulative conversational tool instead of having an actual discussion. And the only way to real wisdom is when two intellectually honest people have differing opinions, but they talk it out with an honest goal of understanding, they will always come closer together. It's impossible, right, for them to get further apart. And that's our whole Talmud study, is discussion and nuance, and all wisdom in the world is in the nuance. The extreme positions, the extreme methodologies of thought, the insistence, and just, invalidating someone because he disagrees, that's really the path to hell.
I'm really unrealistic because my goal, incidentally, I've been Republican, I've been Democrat, I've supported Ronald Reagan, I supported Bush the father, who was a good friend of mine, and I supported Bill Clinton. So I'm what's the word?
You're an independent.
No. Again, my vocabulary is good, but I can't get the word at the instant I want it. I go both ways, so you know what Jackie Mason said? He said the advantage of being bi is you double your chances for a date on a Saturday night. No, but Trump is definitely the all-time genius. I don't know anybody that could do what he does and blames everybody else. No, but I started to say I'm unrealistic because I want a utopia that with human beings you can't. I want us all to work to make it a better world. If up to me, I'd outlaw wars totally. And if somebody starts a war, there should be, a group that's with the UN. The UN is totally worthless. Yeah. It's a political thing, and it has, But if it were a real organization that protected the world against the damage, because I'm convinced that one day we're going to blow up the world. We used every new destructive weapon that we ever developed. We always used it.
Yeah.
And so I'm convinced.
A good conversation for next time. I'll make the world a better place by keeping to my rule of never speaking over my allotted time. And it's as a speaker, if you get 20 minutes and you're great for 20 minutes, but you go 21 minutes, it was an awful speech.
The audience should be thankful. You're right. That the shorter it is, the better. Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great week. I love you all. Every day should be better than the day before for all of you. God bless you.